As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting an ethereal glow across the landscape, I laced up my running shoes and ventured out for my usual jog. The gentle breeze carried a hint of crispness, signaling the onset of autumn. Little did I know that this evening run would be far from ordinary. The rhythmic sound of my footsteps echoed through the quiet neighborhood streets as I settled into my familiar route. Darkness slowly descended, casting elongated shadows that danced alongside me. It was during this solitary run that I began to feel an unsettling presence lurking in the periphery of my awareness. Glancing over my shoulder, my heart skipped a beat. I noticed a group of individuals, their silhouettes weaving through these streets behind me. They seemed to come out of nowhere, their faces obscured by the veil of night. My pace quickened as my instincts screamed at me to escape from their unwavering pursuit. My mind raced, trying to rationalize their presence. Were they just fellow runners coming to say hi? Probably not. Or were they something much more sinister? The streets felt empty and a sense of isolation settled upon me like a heavy fog. Panic began to consume my thoughts, urging me to find safety. With every turn I took, their presence remained constant, their footsteps echoing mine. Fear gripped me as their intentions became increasingly unclear. Questions flooded my mind. Why were they following me? What did they want? I pushed my body to its limits, desperation fueling my strides. But no matter how fast I ran, they seemed to effortlessly match my pace. As if playing a twisted game of cat and mouse, their persistence only intensified my terror. A surge of adrenaline propelled me towards the more populated area. Gasping for breath, I sought refuge amongst the few people who wandered the streets at this hour. But to my horror, the group of pursuers remained undeterred, their presence lingering at the fringes of my vision. My trembling hands reached for my phone, fingers fumbling as I dialed the emergency number. The sound of my voice trembled as I relayed my location and the unfolding event. Every second felt like an eternity as I waited for the arrival of help, acutely aware of the watchful eyes fixed upon me. Finally, the distant sound of sirens pierced the silence, a symphony of hope in the night. The group of strangers seemed to sense the imminent arrival of authority and gradually melted into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. Relief washed over me, but a haunting uncertainty remained. The police arrived, offering reassurance and conducting a thorough search of the area. However, no trace of the group was found. The incident left me shaken, questioning the nature of their intentions and the unexplained nature of their presence. In the days that followed, I became more cautious, never venturing out alone during the evening hours. The incident had etched itself into my mind, a constant reminder that I should always be looking over my shoulder. I honestly don't know what the group was, if it was some weird cult trying to capture me and perform a ritual, or maybe just a group of kids that were playing a prank on somebody. Regardless, it had chilled me to my bones, and I'll be more careful next time when I go for my run. As the last flicker of daylight vanished beyond the horizon, I found myself driving through a desolate stretch of country road. Fatigue gnawed at my bones, urging me to find a respite for the night. Just when I thought that my luck had run dry, a weathered sign emerged from the darkness proclaiming the existence of a nearby motel. Weary and desperate for rest, I pulled into the parking lot of this seemingly forgotten establishment. The motel stood before me, a relic from another era, its faded neon sign flickering ominously. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped out of the car, my senses heightening as if preparing for an encounter with the unknown. In any other case, I would have just drove home and kept going, but I was absolutely exhausted and I needed to sleep. So I headed toward the door. Inside the lobby, an elderly man greeted me with a forced smile. His eyes bore an unsettling emptiness, devoid of any warmth or familiarity. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if time had stood still within these walls. Reluctantly, I accepted the key to my room after paying, and I made my way down a dimly lit corridor. The lights seemed to mock my apprehension, flickering on and off, casting shadows along the peeling wallpaper. The air was suffocating and heavy. As I entered my room for the night, an overpowering, musty odor assaulted my senses. The furniture appeared worn and mismatched, adding to the motel's eerie charm. In all honesty, it's not overly surprising. The place did seem pretty old from the outside, so might as well match it on the inside. As nightfall descended, casting a blanket of darkness over the motel, sounds started emerging from the adjacent rooms. Whispers, hushed conversations, and muffled footsteps. With the walls being thin enough, I could almost make them out. But each noise made me uncomfortable, as I didn't see many other cars in the parking lot. After a while of listening, sleep came fitfully that night. I was plagued by unsettling dreams and sudden awakenings. In the depths of the night, I could have sworn that I still heard those whispers emanating from the other rooms. But soon again, I drifted off into a restless sleep. Curiosity mingled with trepidation the following morning as I ventured to the motel's diner. The patrons huddled in silence, their eyes darting nervously. The sense of unease was palpable, as if each person carried their own dark secret. The motel's eccentricities only grew more apparent with each passing hour. The staff, dressed in outdated uniforms, moved about with an unnatural grace, their expressions vacant and hollow. Strange occurrences became the norm, a phone that rang incessantly but was never answered. After eating, I hurriedly packed my belongings, eager to get out of this place and back home. As I drove away, a mixture of relief and lingering unease washed over me. The memories of that bizarre hotel remain etched in my mind, a reminder of the strange occurrences as a whole. "15 years ago, I made one of the worst decisions of my life. I began dealing for a well-known biker gang. No, I wasn't a member, but I had connections to one of their members through my mutual friend, Josh. I had had a short history in dealing years before, but got clean and walked the straight and narrow. I worked 3 jobs and I was saving up for college. However, tragedy struck when a very close relative of mine was murdered by her new husband while they were traveling in his home country. What made this even more difficult is that they had canceled their life insurance, so the cost of returning them to our country and the funeral arrangements, well, that fell on me and 2 other close relatives. Now, this isn't an excuse for what I did. I just wanted to provide some context to what was going through my head when I had met with Josh and asked to set up a meeting with his relative, Mike, who was a well-known member of the biker gang, so that I could get back up on my feet financially. If you're asking yourself why I didn't just pursue one of the millions of other avenues for financial assistance, it's because I was young, stupid, and I wanted to replace that lost feeling with something I thought would make me feel better about myself at the time. So I gathered a team of hand-picked dealers at my house, and I waited for Mike to come by and discuss a business. And soon enough, he arrives with 2 pounds of weed to front me. My plan was to only involve myself by distributing to my runners so that I could work my regular jobs while making a passive income. Side note, I had known Mike for about a year at this point, which is why so much was given up front. And the term front means to loan, and the term runner refers to a dealer who works for you. Things went well for over the next year and a half, and my team had expanded. I was making a ton of money. I sold the weed to my runners by the ounce and paid a discount by the pound, and I was making hundreds in profit a week. and thousands a month. I was happy and Mike was happy, and he only ever had to deal with me and never had to meet or address any of my runners. However, this is where the story takes a drastic turn for the worse, and why you should never trust a biker gang, especially when you're not working on the inside. I just hired a good friend of mine as a runner and she needed money. It was a single mother and wanted to sell it to her friends who came over and always needed the weed. The girl ended up selling through ounces faster than anyone else, so I trusted her with more product to sell at once since I would have to come back like 2 or 3 times a week. However, I was going on vacation for 3 weeks and I wanted to make sure that she had access to enough while I was away, so I left her with a lot more than I usually would. When I returned, I had to come to collect and everybody but her was up to date on their payments. And after excuse and excuse, she came to me to inform me that her new scale was set to the wrong measurement system and that she was out a good amount. I was upset and I nearly kicked her off the team, but I had known this girl for years and it wasn't anything that I couldn't recover on my own. However, she came to me when I was supposed to meet up with Mike to re-up, and because this took a lot longer than I thought, well, I was late to meet him. Now, remember when I said that you should never trust a biker unless you operate on the inside? Well, I met up with Mike to let him know what happened, and I apologized for being late. I informed him that the situation had been dealt with, but Mike was furious. He tells me that because I was late, he was late meeting his connect for the weed, and since he was late, this connect would never deal with him again. He told me to meet him at Josh's house and to bring who was responsible for making me late, and if I didn't bring them, then I would be held accountable because this connect had made him $5,000 a week in profit. Yeah, you read that right. This man told me that him being late once dissolved a profitable relationship with a connect that earned him $5,000 a week. I already knew what this meant for my runner and we were good friends, and there was no way that I was going to allow a single mother to go through what I knew was coming. So I showed up to Josh's house on my own and I waited for Mike. I sat on Josh's couch for what felt like hours, by myself and uncertain of the extent of what was going to happen. Then Mike walks in and greets Josh, talks with his partners a bit while completely ignoring me. First, 5 minutes go by, and then 10 minutes. And then Mike walks over and I remember waking up on the floor. From what I was told, Mike hit me across the head and I blacked out. He had proceeded to hit me for 2 or 3 more minutes until I woke up to him still hitting me. We sat on the couch and with a handgun to my head, he tells me that he's going to charge me the profit that he would have made every week from this connect for the next year. For those keeping track, that's $260,000. He tells me that he's going to be generous enough to do the first payment of 5 within 48 hours, and that the money that I just gave him for my re-up didn't count, and that I needed to return the weed, and that he was giving me 24 hours for each additional $5,000 after that. He took my car, which he underpriced at $10,000. It was a newish Mercedes at the time that I was still making payments on, and essentially planned on using me as a human ATM. At this point, I knew what was happening, and despite our relationship for the past year, he was going to exploit me for as long as he could until he had a reason to get rid of me. So I went home and I thought about my options. I had around $17,000 in cash. My retirement plan savings also amounted to just over $35,000, but even that would only get me by on the payments for a week. I realized that even if I was able to come up with half of the money, I would end up in jail or worse. After 24 hours of deliberating, I considered the fact that Mike had never met any of my runners. My family had moved away from this town after the death of the relative, and there was no way that I was going to risk my life or my freedom for some arbitrary debt. So I took all my cash and made my savings available, and knew that I only had 24 hours to run as fast and as far as I could. 4:30 a.m. I gathered a bag full of clothes, called a lifelong friend of mine who had moved to another country 4 hours away, explained the situation and asked if I could stay in his couch for a week. And I took a bus as close to the Greyhound station as I could get, without stopping in front of it. The Greyhound didn't require photo ID at the time, and I didn't want to fly out of my own city in case anyone saw me, or Mike was able to figure out where I was going by pressing any of the airport staff. At this point, my heart was beating out of my chest because, although the Greyhound isn't as busy as the airport, if Mike or anyone he knew saw me there, it was game over. I waited an hour and then walked inside and bought a ticket for a city about 3.5 hours away that had an airport. Before boarding, I wrote down all my important contacts, removed the battery from my phone, and dropped it down the sewer, and I began my escape. 8:15 a.m. I stop in said city and buy a ticket to go and meet said friend. 12:30 p.m. I land in a country that I've never been to in a city that I had never been to. My friend picks me up and we talk about the situation the entire way home. Him and I had a similar past, and although the story itself is crazy, he understood. When we arrive at his place, I cut my hair, decide on a new name that I'll go by while staying in the city, while deciding my next move. I get a new prepaid phone and number and try to relax. 6 p.m. I was supposed to meet Mike 30 minutes ago. The stress starts to kick in. 8 p.m. We've been drinking and telling stories, and I remember that I hadn't deleted my Facebook. So I jumped on my friend's laptop, threw on a VPN that was located in my home country, and was met with a flood of messages. Josh and Mike had kicked in my front door and destroyed my place. They left messages with the addresses of places they thought that I was hiding out. They told me that they were watching the airport and Greyhound station, and told me that it would be impossible to leave the city. It was at that point that I realized they never knew that I left. Throughout the coming weeks, months, and years, I made a habit of changing phones, and I moved around from city to city and country to country. I even did those work for your accommodation programs in a couple of countries as a tourist. Every few weeks and months, I would get an email from a single friend back home who would tell me that Josh and his girlfriend were telling people to assure me that it was okay to come back and that things had blown over. A couple times, I even tried to reach out to some other friends back home, only to find out that they were trying to cash in on the reward that Mike had placed to anyone who could find out where I was. It eventually became easier to cut contact with anyone and everyone around me if I felt that I needed to move, or felt that I couldn't entirely trust them. I could never go back to who I was or where I came from, physically or mentally. I later found out that Mike had a nasty habit of hiring dealers. Then when he thought that they had made a good amount of money, he would conjure up some dire situation in which they would need to pay him back a crazy amount. He would drain them for every dime they had until they couldn't pay anymore. After that, they would usually end up in a ditch somewhere. One of his associates, who happened to be my next-door neighbor back home, was recently charged for first-degree murder after taking a woman out to the woods and killing her. Although this did a number on my trust issues, I've made a lot of changes throughout my life since the event. I've changed my name, obviously. I'm in my mid-30s now. I have an amazing corporate position in a company that changes lives. I speak to schools about the impact of poverty, and it's taught me to empathize with people in different positions than my own. I own a condo in a very beautiful city. I'm engaged, and I took up learning a second language. And I never take the second chance that I've been given for granted. I've been clean for just over 15 years now. I've never told anyone in my new life about what's happened. I don't even think that they would believe me. Even though that I take full responsibility for my stupidity in my younger years. But to the biker that is waiting to collect on his ridiculous $260K debt, I hope I never see you again.